In this video, we're going to get an introductory overview into natural language processing, or NLP. So let's get into it. Well, firstly, what is NLP? Well, ultimately, it's just a set of techniques which helps us gain insights from text data, or for that matter, any other type of language data, for instance, voice. But ultimately, the idea is to use these set of techniques to try and gain insights or to try and gain value from language data. And for the most part in finance, at least today, when we think about language data, we typically work with text data. But it wasn't always like this in finance. In fact, historically, academics and practitioners in finance have largely relied on numerical data for investment analysis. Right? And this ranges from something as simple as sort of ratios to more advanced portfolio optimization techniques. But the idea is, regardless of which aspect of finance you look at, be it investment analysis, be it financial modeling or financial statement analysis, or capital budgeting, regardless of which concepts or areas you look at, for the most part, people have worked with numerical data. Now, this wasn't because we didn't have a lot of text data in finance. Far from it. In fact, finance has so much text data that few fields can actually compete with that sort of volume. And so predominantly relying on numerical data instead of text data was largely because analyzing these large volumes of text data was extremely time consuming and indeed cumbersome. And to give you just a minuscule, tiny little idea of the sheer scale of text data that's available in finance, well, back in 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported that the average annual report, or 10K, had about 42,000 words, and this was in 2013. That was up from roughly 30,000 words in 2000. To put this in perspective, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which was this really massive piece of legislation that came about as a result of scandals like Enron and WorldCom and all the other corporate scandals during the dot-com era, well, that massive piece of legislation had approximately 32,000 words. Annual reports today, which is something that firms have to publish every single year, at least back in 2013, it was at about 42,000 words. And the size is not really getting particularly smaller today, as you'll see when we actually work with real-world data. Importantly, of course, if you're thinking, well, 42,000 is not all that big, this is just an average, right? So you'll find plenty of annual reports that have hundreds of thousands of words. And of course, you will find some annual reports that have, tens of thousands, so 10 to 15,000, or perhaps even just 5,000 words. But the point is that this is for a single annual report, right? And firms need to publish these annual reports every single year. So just take a single firm and, say you're looking at 10 years worth of data and the average number of words is 42,000, well, you have 420,000 words to analyze now, right? So good luck if you're doing that manually. I wouldn't be keen, and quite frankly, very few people were keen. And this is why, until fairly recently, these really massive volumes of text data in finance, which have potentially so much value in them, was just left untouched. Of course, the size isn't the only factor that meant people weren't reading these or analyzing these reports. For instance, the CFO of GE, Jeffrey Bornstein, was taken aback by the sheer size of their own annual report. Right? So their annual report was about 110,000 words long, and he himself suggested that not a single retail investor on earth could get through it, let alone understand it. Right? And in terms of this latter part here, this understanding these annual reports, well, that's ultimately because these annual reports tend to have a lot of technical jargon that not a lot of people actually understand. Right? And this is not limited to just retail investors. Although mutual fund managers and hedge fund managers and pension fund managers may not openly admit it, not all of them necessarily understand what all these annual reports are on about, right? Because sometimes they just have terms that one might not have come across. But the point is, academics and practitioners didn't really work with text data in finance despite there being so much text data, partly because, of course, of the technical jargon involved, but largely because of the sheer size of the data, which meant, of course, analyzing all of this text data manually is simply not feasible. Fortunately, though, thanks to major advancements in technology, particularly thanks to computational linguistics, it's now significantly easier to analyze insanely large volumes of text data, the so-called big data. But it's not just about analyzing this text data. Of course, more importantly, it's about gaining insights or value from that text data. And if we think about the sort of applications of NLP in finance, well, they're fairly extensive, they're certainly increasing, and I think with time, they're only going to get bigger and better. Specifically though, while the applications of NLP in finance are fairly wide in their scope, we think we can broadly categorize them into three different types. The first of which is context, right? So this is about using NLP techniques to try and gain context from text data in finance. For example, it's a case of using topic modeling algorithms to try and establish the context of news articles or firm announcements, business descriptions, annual reports, and a whole host of other big data or big text data in finance. Right? So it's a case of using these machine learning algorithms in unsupervised settings to try and establish the themes or topics that are being discussed or talked about in these various different kinds of text data. So that's context. Then there's compliance, which focuses on things like detecting insider trading or detecting and preventing fraud. And it's doing so using unique sets of data, right? So for instance, emails or indeed chat transcripts inside firms. And lastly, of course, the third category, the one we're going to be working with in this course, is quantitative analysis. For instance, creating trading strategies using what we call sentiment analysis. So firstly, estimating the sentiment that firms may display, and then using that sentiment to create trading strategies. Now in the next video, we're going to talk in a lot more detail about the NLP applications in finance for context, compliance, and quantitative analysis. For now though, it's enough for you to just know and be aware that these are the three broad categories in which NLP is applied in finance, and perhaps most importantly, your biggest takeaway from this video should be that natural language processing allows us to really leverage the power of text data and work on interesting problems in finance. In summary, we learned that NLP is a set of techniques which help us gain insights from text data. We learned that today, finance is increasingly using text data in conjunction with more traditional numeric data. And of course, we learned that while the NLP applications in finance are quite wide in scope, we think they can broadly be categorized into either context, compliance, or quantitative analysis. Alright, that's enough from me for now. Have a go at the quiz, and I'll see you in the next video.